The garage smelled like motor oil and old newspapers, same as it had for 30 years. I was sorting through a box of Margaret's things, her gardening gloves, a few seed catalogs she dog-eared but never got around to ordering from, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was my son, a photo message. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened it. A woman I'd never met was smiling up at me from the screen, her arm looped through my son's, the two of them standing in front of what looked like a restaurant I didn't recognize. The caption read, "We're engaged. Dinner Saturday to celebrate. Hope you can make it, Dad." I sat down on an overturned bucket and just stared at that photo for a while. My son Connor had been dating this woman, Renee, for about 8 months. 8 months. I'd met her exactly twice, both times briefly, both times at his apartment in Denver when I happened to be passing through. She was polished in a way that always made me feel slightly underdressed. Good at conversation. Very good at it, actually. The kind of good where afterward you realize she told you almost nothing about herself. Margaret would have known what to make of her in about 10 minutes flat. My wife had a gift for that. She used to say she could tell everything she needed to know about a person by watching how they treated a waiter. I wished, not for the first time that evening, that she were still around to weigh in. She passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Connor had taken it hard, harder than he let on. He was 34 now, had thrown himself into his consulting work after she died, and I think part of him had just been waiting to feel something good again. I understood that. I wasn't about to stand in the way of it. I called him back that same night. "Dad, I know it's fast," he said before I could get a word in. "I know what you're going to say. I haven't said anything yet. You're going to say 8 months isn't very long. 8 months isn't very long. 8 months isn't very long," I agreed. "But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling to say congratulations and to ask when I get to sit down with her properly." He sounded relieved. I could hear him exhale. "Saturday dinner. She's bringing her sister. It'll be good, Dad. I promise." I drove up to Denver that Saturday. The restaurant was a steakhouse in Lodo. Nice place, white tablecloths, the kind of menu where the sides cost extra. I got there first and ordered a sparkling water and tried to settle the low-grade unease that had been following me around all week. I told myself it was just an old man being protective. I told myself Margaret would have told me to relax. Renee arrived wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. She hugged me like we were already family, which should have felt warm and mostly did. Her sister, she introduced her as Chelsea, was quieter, watchful in a way I noticed, and filed away. Connor looked happy, genuinely happy, the way he hadn't looked in years. I made myself let go of the unease and enjoy the evening, and it was a fine evening. Good food, plenty of laughter. Renee told a long story about a disastrous camping trip that had Connor wiping his eyes. She asked me thoughtful questions about my years running the hardware distribution business, seemed genuinely interested in the answers. When the check came, Connor and I had a brief arm wrestle over it that I won. Driving home on I-70 with the mountains dark against the sky, I thought, maybe I was wrong about her. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I just missed my wife and was looking for reasons to find fault. I almost convinced myself. 3 weeks later, Connor called on a Tuesday evening. He had that careful tone he gets when he's working up to something. "So Renee's been talking to a financial planner," he said, "about the wedding." That's sensible. The thing is, the venue she really wants, it's in Aspen, a lodge up there. "It's beautiful, Dad, you'd love it." A pause. "The deposit is significant. Like, it holds the date, but it's non-refundable and it has to go down by Friday or they lose the slot." I waited. "She has some money she's putting in," he continued. "I have some savings, but we're about 18,000 short of what we need to secure everything up front. Venue, catering deposit, the photographer, they all want deposits at the same time, basically." "How much total are we talking about?" 45,000, all in." I was quiet for a moment. "Connor, That's a significant sum for a single event. I know, Dad, I know. But it's what she's always dreamed of, and honestly, I want to give her that. I can't quite get there alone. And you've always said that when the time came. He was right. I had said that. When he graduated college, when he started his business, I told him I'd kept a nest egg set aside for when he needed it, for a home, or a real emergency, or a wedding. I meant it when I said it. Let me think about it, I said. I thought about it for 2 days. I called my accountant, Al, who I've worked with for 20 years, mostly to hear myself talk it through out loud more than anything else. Al listened and then said carefully, "Gifting money for a wedding is common. Just make sure you're comfortable with it being gone regardless of what happens. Regardless of what happens." I turned that over in my mind a few times. On Thursday morning, I transferred $20,000 into Connor's account. I told him it was a gift, no strings, and I meant that too. I told him I was proud of him. I told him I hoped he and Renee would be as lucky as his mother and I had been. He thanked me in a way that made me think he'd been holding his breath for 3 days. I want to be honest about something. The doubts didn't go away after the transfer. I want to say they did, that handing over the money cleared the air somehow. It didn't. They just went quieter, the way an old injury does when the weather is good. Still there, just manageable. The thing that brought them back was something small. About 6 weeks after the transfer, I was in Denver for a doctor's appointment. Routine stuff, nothing serious, and I stopped by Connor's apartment to drop off a box of tools I'd promised him. He wasn't home yet, but Renee let me in. She was on the phone when I arrived and waved me toward the kitchen with a smile, still talking. I wasn't trying to listen, but his apartment isn't large and her voice carried. She was talking about her property. I caught phrases before the title transfers and he doesn't need to be involved in that part. And then, most clearly, Connor's name doesn't have to be on it. She came into the kitchen a minute later, phone tucked away, smile back in place. Asked me if I wanted coffee. I said I was just dropping off the tools and had to get going. On the drive home, I sat with what I'd heard and tried to arrange it in the most charitable way possible. Maybe she was talking about an investment property. Maybe she had financial arrangements from before Connor that were simply none of my business. Maybe I was an old man who had just lost his wife and was looking for reasons to keep his son close. But I couldn't stop hearing it. Connor's name doesn't have to be on it. I talked to my brother-in-law, Dennis. He's not a sentimental man, which is exactly why I called him. He listened without interrupting, which is rare for Dennis, and then said, I'd want to know more before I said anything to the boy, but I wouldn't ignore it either. That was enough. I hired a private investigator. His name was Art, a former sheriff's deputy who ran a small firm out of Colorado Springs. I felt foolish doing it. I kept telling myself I would call Art back and cancel the whole thing. I didn't. 2 weeks later, Art sent me a file. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I read. Renee had been married before. That alone wasn't the issue. The issue was the way the marriage had ended. Her first husband had filed a civil suit against her 4 years ago, alleging she had transferred a substantial portion of his assets into accounts he didn't know existed shortly before initiating divorce proceedings. The case had settled out of court, the records were sealed, but Art knew people, and what he pieced together was detailed enough to be credible. There was more. A second man, a business partner from Phoenix, had posted publicly on a financial fraud forum about a woman matching Renee's description. Her first name was listed as Renata, slightly different, who had convinced him to give her power of attorney over a joint venture, then cleaned out the operating account. He'd never recovered the money. I sat there in my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. I thought about my son's face at that dinner in Loudoun. How happy he'd looked. I thought about the $20,000. I thought about what Connor's name doesn't have to be on it actually meant, now that I was looking at it clearly. I did not call Connor that night. I thought about it every hour and each time I put the phone down. Not because I doubted the information. Art's file was thorough and I knew what I had heard, but because I needed to be smart about this. My son loved this woman. If I called him in a cold fury and listed accusations, I knew exactly what would happen. He'd defend her. He'd call me overprotective, grief-stricken, jealous of his happiness. He'd believe what she told him over what I told him, and I'd lose any chance of getting through. I called Art back and asked him to put everything in a formal written report with sources cited and documents attached where available. I asked my attorney, a woman named Beverly who had handled my estate planning for a decade, to review it and write a cover letter confirming the documents were credible and legally significant. Then I asked Connor to meet me for lunch. Just the two of us. A diner near his office that we'd been going to since he was in college. Corner booth, decent pie, no atmosphere to speak of. I brought the folder. I let him order. I let him tell me about a project he was excited about at work. I listened, and then I slid the folder across the table and said quietly, "I need you to read this before you say anything." He looked at the folder, then at me. "What is this? Please just read it." He read it. The diner was loud around us, a couple arguing pleasantly near the door, a kid asking his mother for more syrup, the sound of the grill. Connor read for about 10 minutes without looking up. When he finally did, his face was impossible to read. "Where did you get this?" "I hired someone." "I know how that sounds, Dad. I know. I know how it sounds. But I heard something at the apartment, and I couldn't let it go. I'm sorry I went about it that way. I'm not sorry I did it." He closed the folder. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, this could be wrong. Art, whoever this could be wrong. "It could be," I said. "That's why Beverly reviewed it. Her letter is on top." He opened it again and found Beverly's letter. Read it slowly. His jaw worked once. "I gave you $20,000, I said. I need you to know I'm not saying any of this to get it back. That money was a gift. I'm not trying to use it as leverage. But I need you to understand what I'm showing you, and I need you to take it seriously." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to think." "Take all the time you need," I said. "But don't tell her about this conversation yet, not until you've decided what you want to do." He nodded once, slowly. I drove home not knowing if I'd done the right thing or detonated the relationship with my son along with everything else. 3 days passed. He didn't call. I left one message, just to say I was there, and didn't push further. On the 4th day, I was in the backyard pulling up the last of the summer garden when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Colorado Springs area code. It was Chelsea, Renee's sister. She said, "Mr. Callahan," then caught herself. "Sorry, I don't know why I said that. I need to talk to someone, and I don't know who else to call." My name isn't Callahan, but I understood what she meant. She meant she'd gotten my number from Connor and didn't quite know how to start. "It's all right," I said. "Go ahead." Chelsea talked for almost an hour. What she told me tracked with Art's report and went further in places. She'd watched her sister operate this way before. Not with malice, she said, or not exactly, more like compulsion. Renee had grown up with nothing, and somewhere along the way had decided that the only way to stay safe was to build financial escape routes out of every situation she was in, regardless of who got hurt. Chelsea had tried to talk to her about it, multiple times. It never worked. "I love my sister," Chelsea said, "but I can't watch her do this to Connor. He's a good man." "He is," I said. "I'll tell him what I just told you. If that's what he needs, if he asks me directly." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it in a way that went beyond the conversation we were having. Connor called the next morning. He'd confronted Renee the night before. Calmly, he said, with the folder in front of him. She'd denied it at first, then deflected, then cycled into something that wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite an explanation and didn't address the actual substance of what he'd asked her. He'd recognized the pattern for what it was. He told me he'd asked her to leave and that he'd ended the engagement. He was quiet on the phone. not angry, just exhausted the way you are after something that took a lot out of you. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. You were right. Being right doesn't make it feel good. No, he said. He really doesn't. I asked if he wanted company. He said not yet, maybe the weekend. I said I'd bring food. He said okay. I went back to the garden after I hung up. The tomatoes were done, the beds needed turning over before the ground hardened. I worked until the light went. Margaret's wind chimes knocked gently at the corner of the porch. The sky over the mountains went the color of an old bruise, then dark. About 2 weeks after that, I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was from a man named Douglas, who identified himself as a partner at a law firm in Phoenix. He was calling on behalf of his client, the man Art had referenced in his report, the one who'd been defrauded through a joint venture. His client had seen activity linked to Renee's identity in Colorado and had been looking for anyone willing to provide a supporting affidavit to reopen the civil case. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with Douglas. I told him what I had. He asked if I'd be willing to share Art's report and Beverly's cover letter with his client's legal team. I said yes. I said I'd also be willing to provide an affidavit. I asked Douglas before we ended the call whether there was any realistic path to his client recovering what he'd lost. Honestly, he said, unclear. But the goal isn't just financial recovery at this point. The goal is to make sure there's a documented pattern so it's harder for her to do it again. I thought that was a good goal. I told him so. It took about 3 months for things to move through the system. I won't pretend I followed every development closely. I provided what was asked of me, signed what needed signing, and stayed out of the way of people who knew what they were doing. At the end of it, Renee agreed to a settlement that included a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing and repayment terms structured over several years. It wasn't everything Douglas's client had lost, but it was something. The weekend I drove up to see Connor, I brought a pot of chili and a loaf of sourdough from the bakery Margaret and I used to go to on Saturdays. He buzzed me up and the apartment felt the same as always. Slightly too warm, books on every surface, a half-assembled IKEA thing in the corner that had probably been there for months. He looked tired but okay, better than I'd expected. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about nothing much for a while, his work, my garden, a trip he was thinking about taking to the Pacific Northwest. I told him I thought that was a good idea. He said he thought so too. After dinner, he brought out 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon he'd been saving for something. What are we celebrating? I asked. He thought about it for a moment, nothing being worse than it could have been. I lifted my glass. I'll drink to that. We sat there for a while after that, in the easy quiet that takes a long time to build with someone, and once you have it, feels like the most valuable thing you own. Outside, Denver was doing what Denver does in October, cycling through 3 different weather events in the span of an hour. Inside, it was warm. I keep thinking about what you said at the diner, Connor said eventually, that you weren't saying it to get the money back. I meant it. I know you did. That's actually what convinced me to take it seriously. He turned his glass slowly. If you'd come in angry, if you'd made it about the money, I would have shut down. But you came in like you were just a guy who was scared for his kid. I was just a guy who was scared for his kid. He nodded slowly. Mom would have spotted it in 5 minutes. Probably 3, I said. He laughed. First real laugh I'd heard from him in weeks. It sounded like hers, slightly, the way things do sometimes. An echo you're not expecting that lands somewhere right in the center of your chest. I stayed until after 10. Drove home with the heat up and the radio on low. The mountains were invisible in the dark, but I knew they were there. Some things you just know are there, even when you can't see them. You learn to trust that. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in all of this. Not the events themselves. Those are clear enough, but the mechanics underneath. Why it unfolded the way it did. What made the difference. The honest answer is that nothing about this story turned out the way it was supposed to. Renee was supposed to become part of our family. The $20,000 was supposed to help my son start a life. The engagement was supposed to end in a wedding, not a folder of documents on a diner table. None of it went where anyone planned. But here's what I've come to believe. Sitting with it long enough, the way things end is almost everything to do with the choices made quietly, when no one's watching and nothing's been decided yet. Renee made choices like that over years, with more than one person, small calculations, private arrangements, doors left unlocked for exits that hadn't been announced. Those choices didn't stay private forever. They never do. Not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, I don't believe that, but because patterns leave marks, and marks eventually get read by someone paying attention. I made choices too. The one I'm most at peace with isn't the folder or the attorney's letter or even the call with Art. It's the decision to sit down across from my son and say what I had to say without anger, without an ultimatum, without making him feel like he had to choose between his father and the woman he loved. I'd seen enough fathers lose their children by being right in the wrong way. I wasn't going to be one of them. Connor told me later that what changed his mind wasn't the evidence, it was the tone. That I came in like a man who was scared, not a man who was winning. I think about that a lot. Intelligence without that kind of discipline is just noise. You can be completely correct and still say a true thing in a way that makes it impossible to hear. The wisdom isn't in knowing, it's in knowing how to hand it over. And Chelsea, I think about her too. She had every reason to stay quiet. Loyalty, family, the path of least resistance. She called anyway. That's not a small thing. It takes something real to look at a situation clearly when someone you love is at the center of it, and still choose honesty over comfort. That kind of courage is quiet, and it costs something. I hope she knows I haven't forgotten it. As for the money, the $20,000, I meant what I told Connor. It was gone the moment I transferred it, and I'd made my peace with that. What I got back was worth more than I could have calculated when I sat down at that diner with a folder and 2 cups of coffee going cold. I got my son back. Not the version of him that was going to spend the next decade untangling a mess I'd watched forming. The real one. The one who laughs like his mother. I'm 63 years old. I've buried a wife. I've built something from nothing and watched parts of it come apart and built again. The thing I keep arriving at, every time, is this. The people who come through hard things intact are almost never the ones who avoided the difficulty. They're the ones who walked into it on purpose with their eyes open and didn't let fear make the decisions for them. That's what I hope Connor takes from all of it. Not the vindication, not the legal settlement, not even the relief of getting out before it got worse. Just that. Walk toward the hard thing. Stay honest. Don't let fear steer. Everything else tends to follow.